So, what I wanted to talk about today is kind of one of the things that we talk about a lot in the Enneagram community is that the Enneagram offers us a chance to understand ourselves and other people around us better. And I think that that's totally true. But one of the things that I like to make a distinction around is the difference between understanding and compassion. These are often ideas or words that get kind of thrown together a lot of times, and sometimes they're even used interchangeably, right? So like, oh, well, we're trying to develop compassion and understanding. And I think that's true. Obviously, we want to be able to understand ourselves better. We want to be able to understand the people in our lives. But I think in this context, especially in using the Enneagram, understanding is good, but compassion is really what we want to be moving towards. And I want to kind of break down the difference. Understanding is like knowing more information. And for a lot of us, the understanding that we gain when we first start engaging with the Enneagram is really, really powerful, right? If you're like me, when you first got into the Enneagram, being able to see and understand things about yourself, about other people, to make guesses about your friends' types and your partners' types, and et cetera, it's like a whole new world opens, right? And suddenly we have kind of this inside baseball kind of secret information about how people are operating. I think that this is a phase that we all really like to be in. It's kind of, to me, it's kind of summed up in like that stage of getting to know the Enneagram where you want to like tell all your friends, like, oh, you're such a six, or oh my gosh, that's such a four thing to say. Right? Like there's that phase that we all go through where it's like we've seen, behind the curtain and we want to let everybody in on what we've seen, right? We want to get everybody on board. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but it falls short of this idea of compassion. And I think that compassion moves much more deeply than just simple understanding. When I understand why you operate in some way, right? Like that's helpful for sure. It provides some context, but there's kind of a distance still. Compassion literally means to suffer with. And when we have compassion for ourselves and for other people, we find ourselves deeply connected to the people around us and truly very deeply connected to ourselves. I liken the difference between compassion and understanding to like, you know, the internet, right? We live in the information age. We can know basically anything we want. I have the key to all understanding right here. I can look up literally anything. And if I have even a little bit of discernment, I can find a lot of good information on the internet. But that information doesn't necessarily change my life. But compassion, that is the core, that is like the foundation of this personal and communal transformation that we're looking for with the Enneagram. Because compassion means that I am with you in whatever you're experiencing, right? More than just knowing why you might be feeling the way that you feel or thinking the things that you think or doing the things that you do. I have an experience in my own body that allows me to more fully experience what you're going through. Compassion offers us the opportunity to move into a true connection with other people. And it's more than just a heart-centered thing. In the past, I've kind of divided these two things up between like understanding is a head-centered thing and compassion is a heart-centered thing. But as I've spent more time really thinking about what's required for compassion, compassion is truly a three-centered experience, right? It brings in the body center, it brings in the heart center, it brings in the head center. Because compassion requires us to be engaged in our work. And when we're engaged in our work and we are facing the parts of ourselves that are hard to face, and we are working through the things that are hard to work through, then not only do we understand the difficulty that someone else might be having, but we have a lived experience that we can draw on that allows us to change our entire posture of how we relate to the people in our lives. Compassion requires an acceptance, both of ourselves and of the people that we're relating to. And it's this acceptance that makes all the difference. You know, you can't suffer with someone if you haven't suffered, if you haven't done the work of seeing your type and all of the good and hard, not so good, bad, ugly things that are happening for you internally in your life, if you haven't seen and accepted those things, then there's not going to be any space for you to have that same kind of acceptance for other people. And without that acceptance, our default experience of others is judgment. And so compassion allows us to accept ourselves and accept other people and move into this loving, connective space instead of being stuck in this judgmental space. We can have a lot of understanding and understanding the ins and outs of people's types and what's going on in their lives. And we can know all the things and piece all the context together and we can still be judgmental of them, right? We can still have this attitude towards ourselves and other people that says, well, you're doing it wrong, or that's not good enough. But when we enter into the work of accepting ourselves, right, in this three-centered capacity, suddenly that judgment starts to fade away. And as that judgment fades, we have the opportunity to build new and stronger relationships, even with people that we've been in relationship with for decades. You know, the compassion piece for me really feels like I'm to the space now where I don't talk much about the Enneagram, except for like in these sorts of circles where it's like, okay, we're going to go to this space and talk about it. But in everyday life, it might be running in the background and I might be thinking about it in some ways, but I'm not particularly forthcoming about my type or particularly curious about other people's types because I know how sensitive that information is. Right. I was typed by a friend of mine when I first got into the Enneagram. He was like, "Oh my God, you're such an eight." And I was like, "Fuck does that mean?" And, you know, in typical eight fashion, and it started a conversation and it started an interest of mine, which has led into all this. But what I find so interesting about that is that when you type someone or when you bring up the Enneagram, you're bringing up so much. In the beginning, when we think, oh, it's just this information and it's really cool, and we're kind of like, you know, evangelizing about it, we don't realize the weight and the depth that what we're talking about carries with it, right? I bust out, you know, the Riso and Hudson book, right? We can flip through there. When I say, oh, you're being such a nine, there's so much in that description about what a nine is. You're throwing around not just somebody's silly behavior, but you're throwing around their deepest core wounding. You're throwing around the things they struggled with as a child, right? The kind of understanding approach where you're just kind of sharing the information, you're missing how this tool is actually alive in people's lives. But when you start to dig down deeper and you go on the journey yourself, right? You enter into the intentional suffering, as Gurdjieff would say, of exploring who you are, then you realize what we're talking about when we talk about type is so much deeper and it's so much more sacred. And this kind of working with the Enneagram is what I hope to bring people into, right? That what we're talking about is sensitive and it's delicate in a lot of ways. And it's truly sacred. This tool allows you to see someone so much more deeply, so much more quickly. I think you can definitely see people in very deep and intimate ways over the course of time through relationship, etc. But this kind of gives you like a shortcut, right? A shortcut to intimacy. And it's something that I think we should really hold with a lot more reverence. Yes, Enneagram memes are funny, and I laugh about them often. And in day-to-day life, it's my goal to move through the world, not just with this kind of understanding of the Enneagram, but with true three-centered compassion for myself and other people that the Enneagram has allowed me to move into. Because I know these things, because I've gone on this journey myself, guided by this tool, I can now move into relationship with the people around me in a much more compassionate way, in a much less judgmental way. And I think understanding the difference between these two ideas, between understanding and compassion, allows us to move more skillfully and to maybe intentionally develop more of this compassionate way of being instead of just operating with this depth of understanding that the Enneagram offers us. Again, not that understanding is bad, but it's more like the first step. And I hope that we can all move a few more steps deeper into this compassionate space.